Hello, friend. This is To Live the Truth, the podcast. My name is Ryan Clawson. In this show, we sit down to dive a little deeper into the concepts in my book, To Live the Truth, which you can read for free at ryantclawson.com/tolivethetruth. In each episode, we address one chapter in a sort of book club format. This week, my wonderful wife, Allie, and I talk about Chapter 3, Obstacles.
We decided to start by trying something a little different by having you share kind of a sum up of what we've talked about so far on the podcast. So, you ready for that?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, in the last few chapters, we've discussed truth and what that is, kind of like the building blocks or the principles and laws that our universe is run by or run on. I love this quote in your first chapter, things as they are, and things as they were, and things as they are to come. So truth is eternal, unchanging. It stems from one source, and that is God. And the reason why it's important to know and to discover truth is because the more truth we have in our lives, first off, the closer we are to God, but also the more success and happiness we can find in life.
Perfect. Excellent. And then, so now we're talking about chapter 3, which is titled Obstacles. Do you have a kind of a summary for that?
Yeah, so we know what truth is, or, the start of it. We know that we want it, we want to seek it. And so I think it's important to know what is standing in our way, what kind of things we're going to face, and maybe the feelings we're going to have, because there's just a lot of obstacles that could come in the way. It could be scary or it could be difficult. So you take this chapter to address all that.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And specifically, I bring up two major obstacles I've identified as the primary obstacles to discovering truth. And, on page 37, it kind of sums it up. So I'm going to read that just to introduce the topics. So it says, two major obstacles that can block our way to truth are 1, overconfidence in our own knowledge and understanding, and 2, fear of the complexity and disruptive nature of truth, which can be diminished and overcome through 1, striving to be humble and open-minded, and 2, cultivating confidence in the power of truth to, in the end, make you free. So those are the two major obstacles that I bring up, but then I also mention a handful of additional skills and attributes that can supplement truth-seeking, such as self-compassion, which is basically the skill of giving yourself a break, curiosity, patience, and prayerfulness. So, I thought we could start by talking about the first obstacle, which is overconfidence in our own knowledge and understanding, and its antidote of sorts, which is humility and open-mindedness. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think that the poem from Alexander Pope is really cool.
You want to read it?
Okay. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring. Their shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again.
Yeah. So what do you like about those lines?
Well, it shows that sometimes when we start to discover something or learn something, we think that we're amazing and that we know everything. And I think it can actually be a hindrance to us. And like he says, it can be dangerous. But once we dive into it more or learn more about that subject or about the world, then we realize that we know nothing, and it humbles us.
Mm-hmm.
And it sobers us.
Yeah, exactly. And it should be made clear that the Pierian spring is just a metaphor for the source of knowledge, right? Mm. And I love that phrase, drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring. Basically he's saying, if you're going to seek knowledge, drink of it deeply. Mm. Don't just take a little sip out of it and think that that's enough. You'd be better off to not touch it at all. Pretty cool.
That is cool.
And it's also an overwhelming proposition, right? Like, it's really kind of this Pandora's box that once you open this thing, you've begun a journey that is not short or simple or easy. And yes, it's definitely, an illustration of, I mean, I quote Socrates just in the next paragraph, who, having dedicated his life to wisdom, concluded, "I know that I know nothing," And I don't remember where I heard this phrase, but it's kind of a maxim that goes, the more you know you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really what this poem illustrates.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So, as a result of that, we need to be humble and open-minded. We need to recognize that no matter how much learning you have, even if you think you have drunk deeply from the Pierian spring, there is still so much you don't know. And hopefully, if you truly have drunk from the Pierian spring, you will recognize that. Do you have any other thoughts about that?
I don't know. I guess I'm thinking about what you just said. Like, if you feel like you know a lot or are really good or really knowledgeable or know everything, then I guess, yeah, keep drinking. Like, I don't know. That's fun.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is it doesn't matter who you are. The invitation is keep drinking.
Yeah.
Right. That's really the bottom line.
Well, yeah. It's impossible for any of one of us to have it all.
Yes. And that kind of leads us into this next thing that we mentioned back in the first episode that I really wanted to talk about, which is just how to deal with scenarios where you encounter someone who thinks differently than you do or has different opinions than you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's easy in that scenario to just kind of scoff and rule them out as, oh, they're just wrong, right? And this is a common occurrence for any human, right? Especially on social media, you find a comment or a post or something that just grates with everything you believe in, it feels like. And the temptation, the easy path in that scenario is to just say, I'm right, they're wrong, they need to change, right? But I suggest using the imagery of the tree of truth that since none of our personal trees are perfectly trimmed, might it be possible that others' lifestyles and beliefs, though different from our own, are also rooted in truth? And just as two branches may protrude in opposite directions from the same tree trunk, two branches of truth may seem to contradict each other. And I quote Niels Bohr, who said the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth. There's another quote that I wanted to get in there, but it just didn't flow, from Oscar Wilde, where he says, "The way of paradoxes is the way of truth. To test reality, we must see it on the tightrope. When the verities become acrobats, we can judge them." I love that quote so much. And it's similar to something Joseph Smith said, that in proving contraries, the truth is made manifest. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting concept to try and wrap your head around, but just recognizing that two opposite profound truths can both be equally true. And I give a list of examples: justice and mercy, individualism and community, liberalism and conservatism, and that one may get some listeners upset, yet I believe it is very true. Idealism and realism, and confidence and humility. Each of those pairs are opposites to one another, and yet I believe are likely equally rooted in truth. So that provides the possibility, in my mind anyway, to be a little bit more comfortable considering the opinions of someone who seems to be completely opposite of my beliefs and values and lifestyles, right? Which may seem, well, it's scary, and it may seem even kind of the opposite of what I've said before, where I've disparaged relativism and this ideology that your truth may be equally true while mine is also true. Truth is relative, so it doesn't matter, right? But it's really the opposite of that. It's just more of a humble recognition that I don't have it all figured out. That being said, you've got to find like the sweet spot of recognizing that, if you just accept every idea that you're presented with you'll be a waverer, right? I mean, like I think of like James 1:6. He that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. And that lines up with what the quote that I have at the beginning of the chapter from Gandhi that I really love. He says, "Your mind should be like a room with many open windows. Let the breeze flow in from all, but refuse to be blown away by any one." Anyway, the bottom line, what I want to really bring up is this concept of recognizing that if two opposite profound truths can be equally rooted in truth, then certainly when you encounter somebody with opinions that seem completely contradictory to your own, there may be something to learn from them. There may be a bit of truth that they have that you don't. And to just shut your mind off to them and rule them out as wrong cheats yourself of a really awesome experience of learning. Which leads me to something that I really wanted to share. There's something that Stephen R. Covey shared that has really impacted me. And first of all, I want to be clear, this is not something I have mastered. This is a challenge that I continue to deal with. But Stephen R. Covey talks about something that he calls searching for a third alternative. And he kind of lumps it under synergy. The synergy is something that happens when two people come together or more, and their combined efforts add up to more than the sum of their individual parts, right? Anyway, so he calls this searching for a third alternative. Basically, when two parties come together with strongly opposed beliefs or ideas or opinions, he proposes this method to solve the problem, right? And it's basically a two-step method. Step one, you ask the question, would you be willing to search for a solution that is better than what either one of you have proposed? And the second step is, would you agree to a simple ground rule? No one can make his or her point until they have restated the other person's point to his or her satisfaction. So just imagine that kind of scenario, especially a very heated scenario. Imagine if, for example, our political debates were run this way. One, rather than being rigidly set on your idea, your policy, your solution, whatever it is, are you open to a third alternative, whatever that may be, something that also meets your needs, but isn't this rigid plan that you've developed? And two, you have to, before you make any point, before you say anything in argument for your side, you have to restate what your opponent has just stated to their satisfaction. Just imagine that. I mean, our political debates nowadays just go more of tearing the other person down, scoffing and laughing at their ideas and the things they just said. This would totally change things, right? Stephen R. Covey talks about his experiences sharing this. He says, over the years, some of my most challenging but enjoyable professional experiences have come from acting as a third-party facilitator in taking people who are very emotionally invested in strong opposition to each other to the two steps of searching for and finding a synergistic third alternative. One of my very first experiences took place when our firm needed to film a genuine, real-life, spontaneous experience that taught synergy for a product we were creating. So I decided to use one of my live seminars. I chose a highly charged subject, the environment, and invited two people in the audience to come up and join me on the stage. A woman who was a strong, convinced, passionate environmentalist, and a strong, convinced, passionate businessman who uses natural resources for economic purposes in his business. They never shook hands. She even attacked him on her way up to the stage, saying, "It is your ilk that has messed up our air, our water, and our kids' futures." Then he looked at her shoes and said, "Nice shoes. Are they leather?" She looked down and then back at him and responded, "What's that got to do with it?" He retorted, "I just wonder what animal you killed." She answered, "I don't kill animals." He responded, "Oh, you had others do the killing for you." That was the beginning of the communication. So not a very synergistic situation, right? 45 minutes later, after going through the two steps, They both were arguing for sustainable development policies at the corporate and government levels. The audience was totally amazed. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that's so cool and so powerful. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, some thoughts that went through my head is that just that quote that's everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. I think that would be really helpful to view everyone as, instead of you have it all figured out and they have something to learn from you, you think, okay, what can I learn from them? I think that is how we're going to keep more of an open mind and be more humble in this process.
Yeah.
Because I am definitely guilty of that. Sometimes I think like, oh, I'm going to talk about this because I feel like I have it figured out, or, or I'm learning about this and this, I don't know, just like view it differently in your social situations.
Also, just developing that habit of listening to understand, which that is a skill that will take a lifetime to develop.
Right.
I mean, there's always room for improvement there, and it is so impactful. The slightest improvement in that one skill has just exponential impact in your life. And again, I'm not saying I'm good at it. It's a challenge for me. And if I'm not constantly putting effort towards it, I notice that it kind of atrophies, Yeah. But anyway.
Well, just about that, listening to understand. Like, I think we don't want to do that because we feel like I already know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not worth it. But like, then it's going to be fine. If you really do have the full truth or the answer or it's correct, your thoughts, your mindset is the correct way, then listening and fully understanding isn't going to change it. But if it does, don't you want that? Isn't that a better alternative?
Right. And you're dipping into the next obstacle. Because you asked why are we so reluctant to be open-minded? Well, one of the main reasons is because we're afraid of the truth, right? So maybe let's continue on to that section.
Yeah.
I quote Adam Grant. He says, when it comes to our own knowledge and opinions, we often favor feeling right over being right. Right? And there are two things that fall as natural domino effects if we admit that we're wrong. To admit we're wrong means acknowledging, one, that to some degree we've been living in error, which can be painful and embarrassing. It feels good to believe you're right. Everyone knows that proud "I told you so" feeling. Isn't that so true?
Mm-hmm.
Two, that we now must make a change. The only thing worse than being wrong before, you think to yourself, is continuing to be wrong now, once I know better. But change is difficult and humiliating, so it's often easier to reject new insights and cling to what's familiar. So we're afraid of truth for that reason, of that need to be consistent. Another reason we fear truth is that it can seem complicated and overwhelming and daunting. We have formulated simple, concrete ideas and worldviews in our minds, and to have that challenged or disrupted or even torn down in some scenarios can feel disorienting and frightening, right?
Yeah, I feel like these ideas, like you said, they can be so concrete in our lives. Like they almost become like us, and so for that to change or to be crumbled down, it's confusing, and
it's an identity change.
Yes.
For sure. Oh, I love that. Let's talk about Holmes's quote here. I'd like to maybe see what insights you have on this, because it's a challenging quote. And the first time I encountered it, it blew me over. I was like, wow, this is really interesting, but I didn't understand it, Actually, why don't you read it? Would you read it?
Mm-hmm. For the simplicity on this side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, for that I would give you anything I have.
Yeah. So what do you think of that? I know we've talked about it for a while, so it may be hard to go back and imagine, try and remember.
I remember when you read it to me and I was like, huh? But now reading it, it seems I don't know, like
self-evident.
yeah, it's like simple and clear, and I'm like, oh, everyone's gonna think this is awesome, but maybe they'll be feeling how I felt when you first read it to me. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of an analogy to explain it. Can you think of an analogy?
Yeah, if you flip the page, well, I've heard it compared to trying to swim across the swift river. Remember we talked about this?
Mm-hmm.
That's the best analogy. That's the analogy that comes to my mind, or the metaphor or whatever. That, while you're standing on the simplicity on this side of the complexity, you feel steady. You feel like you're on firm ground. And it's much more comfortable to remain standing on that bank of simplicity, that solid ground. And to dive into truth is often like leaving that solid ground to enter this swift river, much less comfortable, much less steady, and often it's a struggle. It's really fighting through these things that challenge those simple beliefs that you held before, right? But once you struggle through it and get to the other side, you've gained so much greater insight and wisdom and understanding of the matter at hand. And the interesting thing about it is you find yourself standing on firm ground again. Mm-hmm. And that firm ground looks a lot like the ground you were standing on at the beginning of this. You kind of arrive back at where you were to begin with, often, not always, but often. But it's a richer, more complete understanding of that thing. That's why I give the example of Abe Lincoln, right? Mm-hmm. Because when we were kids, everybody in the United States learns about Abe Lincoln, and we learn all the little myths about him. We learn about him walking how many miles to return 1 penny to the store owner because he had been, the change was incorrect or something. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we just have these simple two-dimensional teachings given to us about these things. And we just grow up just taking it as a given truth, right? But if you really want to get to understand Abraham Lincoln and you pick up one of his biographies, you'll encounter things that reveal that the truth is much more complicated than those simple teachings when we were kids, right? And initially, they may really jar you. For me personally, my journey has been, as I've read a little bit more about Abraham Lincoln, because I think he's an interesting historical figure, learning these things about him were kind of disorienting. For me, it was a kind of a big shocker to learn, particularly that he considered relocating the slaves. That was kind of a jarring thing for me. To me, it seemed out of character for what I pictured him to be. But after having looked into it, reading several books on him, and really pondering the age he lived in and the kind of decisions he had to make, I've arrived back at where I started, at the same conviction that Abraham Lincoln was an honest, virtuous man who was a great president of the United States. It's the same thing I believed before, but it's there's so much more depth to it now than just my childhood beliefs and teachings. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like the same belief that you have is actually stronger now.
Exactly.
And it's going to take, I don't know, it's going to be harder to jar you or to,
Absolutely.
shake your trust or admiration of him.
Yes.
Even though you know more truth now. It's like your quote, I don't know if I can say it yet. The truth will set you free.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's the key that I believe unlocks the fear of truth. Mm-hmm. Trusting in that promise that Jesus gave, that the truth shall make you free. And just like you had said earlier, that, if you really step back and you look at it as, truth provides strength, which is actually, that's a funny thing. That's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He said, "Right makes might," essentially saying truth provides strength. And so instead of cowering away from this painful, complex, uncomfortable truth that you've suddenly encountered and turning back to the shadows on the wall, trusting in that fact that the truth in the end will make you free, can really counteract that fear. Now, that's easier said than done. You have to remind yourself regularly of that, especially when something is particularly disruptive, and I've encountered many of that in my life, and to be perfectly vulnerable, Abraham Lincoln is a mild example compared to my experience learning about Joseph Smith. But it's the same, for me, it's the same, my experience in arriving at that simplicity on the other side. And I feel in many ways the same way I did before going on that journey. And I wouldn't give that up for the world. Just like Holmes said, that simplicity on the far side of complexity is infinitely more valuable.
Yeah, something that I just keep thinking about. Like your river analogy. When you're on this side of the river, this side of complexity, once you get across the complex, hard river, there's another river after that. Like I feel like once you're across, you've arrived at that new level of simplicity. And it's just like a stepping stone. It's a resting place on this journey, on this climb.
That's great. Let's finish up by just talking about these additional skills. So first of all, I put in there self-compassion, which was something that I needed very much and still could use more of. And I think I put it in there because I thought it might resonate with others as well. Self-compassion is essentially the practice of giving yourself grace because of what we earlier mentioned, that to acknowledge that you are wrong means that you've been living in error and that you need to change. And that can open up the possibility of being hard on yourself. I should have known better. How could I be so stupid not to see this before? And you beat yourself up. Now, I was introduced to this a few years ago, just getting into some mindfulness podcasts and some books. The one that really spoke to me is the one that I mentioned by Shauna Shapiro. It's called Good Morning, I Love You. There are other books that I've read and man, it's just so interesting and how true it is that we are hard on ourselves. We shame ourselves largely because we believe it will motivate us, right? We think, you should be doing better. You're such a waste. Get your butt in gear. But research has shown that has actually the opposite effect. It contributes to depression, which saps your motivation and energy, whereas self-compassion really provides the grace and the space to explore and grow and learn.
Just thinking about how God views us on this journey of learning truth. And I don't know, just viewing it from his viewpoint makes it like easier to have more self-compassion.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't expect us to have it all figured out and to know everything. And when we do eventually figure it out, he's just cheering us on at that point, Like, yay, you figured it out now. Like, there's no need to beat yourself up about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a thing to celebrate now.
Yeah. The next trait is curiosity. And of course, I love the Helen Keller quote. I feel like it's such a jab. I have the advantage of a mind trained to think, and that is the difference between myself and most people, not my blindness and their sight. So good. And I love the story of Helen Keller. It's so fascinating to just contemplate her life. I mean, you've read her biography. I've just read that children's book to the kids that just has little excerpts from her biography. And it just blows my mind. Her experience with her sight and her hearing being completely blocked off, her mind being an island unto itself for years. And then just the experience of learning words for the first time and how it was such an awakening for her. That's so fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Helen's just insatiable hunger for learning once she had some kind of access point open to her. So fascinating and so inspiring.
Helen really relied on her thoughts and her, just thinking things through and discovering it and, I don't know, sifting it all out in her own mind. She even said that was the downside of going to college versus just reading on her own and thinking it through, because she was doing less of her own thinking.
Interesting. And I think about, the fact that she talks about having only a handful of Braille books and that she would read them so often and so vigorously that she would wear the Braille down to where she could barely read it anymore. what it makes me think of is just like how ungrateful I am. I should be reading 3 times as much because I have not even a fraction of the barriers that she experienced, and if she was so just voracious in her learning, I have no excuse,
Right.
It's crazy. Cool. Okay, let's move on to patience. So I feel like this is very closely related to self-compassion because it's important to be patient with ourselves and our own pace of learning and growth, but also just patience with the process.
Mm-hmm.
We are often tempted to demand immediate mastery or quick answers. And this is something that that I admire about Socrates. I also find it kind of comical that nobody ever had the patience to see it through to the end with him. He was just so determined to not take the easy path, to not just fixate on the first easy answer, that he would just constantly ask new questions. Well, wait a minute, that before we decide that this is the answer, let's consider this and this. And so like almost every one of his inquiries, at least in Plato's writings, they almost always end with the other person saying, gee, look at the time. I think I left something in the oven, or I got to be somewhere, just so funny. But like, he's just such a good example of that kind of patience to not just fixate on the first easy answer, right? And to be willing to sit with the uncertainty, with that trust and patience that eventually a higher level of wisdom and understanding will come.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, prayerfulness. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's God's truth. It all stems from him. He knows it all. And he desires for us to align with it as close as we can so that we can be closer to him and live successful, happy lives. And so I think that he's going to help us find it. If we ask and we put forth the effort, that he'll guide us to it.
Yeah. If you're religious, it is so helpful to include the creator of truth in your search for truth, right? If you're not religious, I still make the case for regular silence and reflection, which is something that is missing in modern life quite a bit. It's just that time to meditate and reflect, right? But often that practice of regularly spending time in solitude is really a big key to unlocking learning. You can read all the books in the world, and if you don't have the time to reflect on what you've read, it's of very little profit. Anyway.
I think it's good.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, so there you have it. There's chapter 3, where we discuss the obstacles to learning truth and some skills to work on that can help overcome those obstacles and make that search more effective and helpful. Next episode, we'll talk about chapter 4, which is all about where to find truth, where to search for truth. Pretty exciting. This is probably the chapter I've gotten the most comments on from people who have read it, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me, Allie. Always enjoy chatting with you about these things.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. Additional resources can be found on my website at ryantclawson.com. If you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comments section and we will address them in a future episode. Also, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast. That makes us easier to find. Finally, I wish you peace and success, and I hope you can join me next week.